Historical implications, impact of geography on acquired knowledge. The American Civil War has been and continues to be a contentious issue of debate within the United States. The American Civil War can, in simplistic terms, be defined as a war between the northern and southern states of the United States of America. However, the war between the Union and Confederacy, now known as the bloodiest war fought on American soil, is based off of more complex ideas that, depending on geographic location, tend to vary. The American Civil War began in 1861. However, the reasons as to why this war truly began in the first place are controversial, due to the opinions that are held by the northern versus the southern states. If the question as to why the American Civil War started was asked to a northerner, their response might differ from that of a southerner. In the beginning of the American Civil War, the members of the Union believed they were fighting to preserve the state of the Union. However, as the war progressed and the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, freeing all slaves in rebellious states, the members of the Union focused their efforts on the freedom of African American slaves that were abundant in the southern states. However, a soldier of the Confederate Army may respond saying that the reason the American Civil War occurred was that the southern states wanted to preserve their way of life, including the use of slaves to increase economic standards, and the Union was a threat to their society. These very ideas when it comes to how and why the American Civil War took place can still be seen in modern-day society through the ways in which students are being taught the history of this war depending on whether the state they are living in was a member of the Union or Confederate Army. For example, students in northern states learned that this historical event was called the Civil War. However, students in the southern states are taught that this was the War of Northern Aggression. Therefore, geography can impact the acquisition of knowledge and how certain events, such as the American Civil War, are perceived.
This real-life situation lends itself to our knowledge issue. How does geographic location impact our perception and understanding of events that have transpired throughout history? Through this presentation, we will prove that geographic location does have an impact on the acquisition and interpretation of knowledge. This incorporates areas of knowledge such as memory, emotion, and perception, viewed through a lens of psychology and history. As with any contentious issue, opposing individual beliefs are largely a result of personal bias. This is influenced by perspective, including how people are taught information and how this information is interpreted. The long-debated issue of nature versus nurture, essentially biology versus environment, is still very polemic, though most psychologists agree that development is influenced by a fair combination of the two. The nurture portion of this debate lends itself to the real-life situation at hand, as it portrays the idea that the environment in which people are raised has a profound effect on their perspective and development. We see differences in northern and southern communities in the ideals and beliefs that they foster for young children. We see this in how the war itself is referred to. In most northern states, it is formally known as the American Civil War, whereas in the South it is commonly referred to as the War of Northern Aggression or the War between the states, supporting pro-Confederate ideals. There are other observable differences in the way that this event is taught. In 2011, the Virginia State Board of Education had to withdraw previous approval for a textbook entitled Our Virginia, Past and Present, for asserting that thousands of African Americans fought as Southern soldiers, a claim that most historians reject. It is not to say that in every American history classroom of all Southern schools you will find a teacher encouraging Southern supremacy or Confederate ideals, but it does remain a contentious issue. It is natural for people to accept the ideals that they grew up believing to be true from a young age. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort experienced by an individual when presented with information that contradicts what they previously viewed as true. It is common for people to reject this new information, as accepting its potential validity could result in mental and moral confusion. This provides an argument for why there may be regional differences in how the Civil War is taught. Both Northerners and Southerners experience discomfort and find it undesirable to accept that they may be wrong, as this is in human nature. As the Southern Confederacy was defeated and the slavery supported was abolished, it provides a source of discomfort for Southerners to evaluate ethical implications of the time. Another problem arises when considering the remembrance of events, as memory is fallible, and it is subject to individual perception and bias as well. The brain obtains information through an action called encoding, which refers to the processing of information into the memory system. Our brains will then store this information for later retrieval. A failure to encode information properly can prevent it from entering our long-term memory, restricting retrieval. Even if something is encoded, we can later forget it due to storage decay of memories. When our brains have trouble encoding and processing certain information, we forget these things, leading to holes in some memories. It is here that things may be assumed or fabricated in order to fill these gaps and make sense of things. The human brain is a notable meaning maker, changing things in order to make sense of them, often distorting our reality. An example of the brain distorting reality is exemplified by how what we actually see is an upside-down image on the back of the retina, yet, since this wouldn't make sense, the image is flipped upright to coincide with our mental predispositions. Due to a culmination of these psychological principles, it can be understood where different views of what transpired during the American Civil War stem from. This is not to denounce northern nor southern perspectives, it is just to say that there were differences that are important to acknowledge in order to understand regional views of this major historical event.
History is a significant area of study in terms of further developing the answer to our knowledge issue because it allows us to reflect on events of the past and learn from them. History is also an area of study where the details of nearly every major event are debated over, causing differences in overall understanding. This sense of controversy is a result of how things are both taught and learned, which are also influenced by perspective and the aforementioned psychological concepts behind it. Another example of a real-life situation where geographic location can play into an individual's biased perspective of a historical event is the Katyn massacre. This genocide of approximately 22,000 Polish elites, such as Polish officers, intellectuals, and skilled craftsmen, took place in 1940 in a part of Poland known as the Katyn Forest. This brutal killing of thousands of Polish men was implemented under the iron fist of the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, Joseph Stalin. However, when the executions initially took place, the Soviet officials in power framed the German army for their crime against humanity. The Soviets claimed that when the victims were discovered by the Germans in 1943, that the German armed forces were the ones responsible for the killings of these Polish citizens due to the fact that the fatal wounds of the victims were shots to the back of the head, a signature move by the German army by German-made guns. The Soviet government even attempted to change the date of which this event occurred from 1940 to 1941 in order to further implicate the German army as the perpetrators of this crime because the Third Reich occupied the land in which this execution took place during that period of time. However, Germany firmly denied that they were the ones responsible for this massacre and placed the blame on the Soviet army. Not only did the German citizens not believe the Soviet Union's fabrications of what really took place in the Katyn forest during the year of 1940, but many Polish citizens were also leery of whether or not Stalin and his army were telling the truth. The accurate depiction of what happened to those 22,000 Polish elites was not discovered until 1990, when the new leader of the Russian state, Mikhail Gorbachev, revealed that the NKVD were accountable for this heinous crime. The historical event of the Katyn massacre, similarly to the American Civil War, further portrays the idea that geographic location plays a major role in how people perceive what happened throughout history. If an individual was a member or supporter of the Soviet regime, then they would accept Stalin's claims that Hitler's army was responsible for the executions. However, if someone lived under the German sphere of influence or favored Hitler's Third Reich over Stalin's Soviet Union, they would side with the claims that the Soviets were the ones to blame. Therefore, depending on where an individual was located, up until 1990 when Gorbachev officially announced Russia's accountability for this act of genocide, there were continued differing opinions on what nation was responsible for the murder of these Polish men. This additional example of how history is subjective depending on the individual and the region they live in is beneficial in helping to clarify how it is understood so differently in the country it occurred.
To recap, the real-life situation of this work is the way in which the American Civil War is taught differently to students in varying regions of the country, the North and the South. Extracted from this situation is the knowledge issue. How does geographic location impact our perception and understanding of events that have transpired throughout history? Through various instances reported and documented, we can see that there is a difference in how the American Civil War is understood. Contributing factors in this include psychological tendencies and how they alter perspective, as well as history's subjective nature. This knowledge issue and real-life situation are worthy of investigation, as its importance is not just exclusive to the United States. The understanding of significant parts of history, as well as controversy over the details, is a worldwide phenomenon, making this a topic with global implications.